Hello and welcome to this Against the Storm tutorial on buildings and blueprints. As I mentioned in the introductory tutorial, this series will be covering all aspects of the gameplay, all of the various features and mechanics of the game. Against the Storm has undergone many overhaul changes in its 2+ years in early access, and buildings, blueprints, and the way you select buildings are no exception. However, now that the game is in version 1.0, we can fully understand and describe how its features work. This tutorial will explain all of the key features of buildings and blueprints and the screens, and provide some tips and tricks along the way. A little note/disclaimer. This tutorial is about building selection and building choices, not specifically about the building interface panel. That will be covered in the next tutorial, crafting and recipes. Whenever you start a new settlement, you're given, at the start, 3 blueprint roll chances. Those are found here with this flashing icon on the reputation meter, and you can just click that icon to be presented with those choices. At the beginning of the game, you will have a choice of 3 buildings, whereas a little later in the game, when you unlock the ability, you will be given a 4th choice that is referred to as the wildcard choice. The first 3 slots, or the only 3 slots in this case, are, at the beginning of the game, buildings that you want to get at the beginning of the game. Most likely. These slots are weighted depending on which phase of the game you're at. So the first 3 choices are mostly early game choices. First 3 rolls, I should say. Whereas as you progress through the game, the weight of the different choices is weighed more toward later game buildings. The 4th choice, the wildcard choice, is a wildcard. It can be any blueprint that is available in your current save. On this screen, you can find a biome conditions panel that pops out when you mouse over this icon. This tells you / reminds you what resources you can get from the trees, from the ground, and what your current, or what the fertile soil condition is in the biome you've selected. Especially with these early game choices, this should heavily influence what choice you make at this point in the game. So, for example, we've been given 3 building choices here. One of them is a camp upgrade, and 2 of them are farm buildings. At the beginning of the game, you start with every possible camp, but 3 of them are considered small camps. You can see those here in the camp's menu. Woodcutter, stonecutter, and harvester are all the larger or the full camps. There are no small versions of these. Woodcutters can cut any tree. Stonecutters can collect any stone, clay, or sea marrow. Harvesters can collect any plant fiber or reed. However, the forager, the herbalist, and the trapper are limited in that they can only collect the 1-star nodes, which are the small nodes. Small nodes are found in all small glades, as well as sometimes in the larger danger or forbidden glades. The blueprint choice gives you the opportunity to upgrade one of those small camps into a full, usually referred to as a large camp. Whereas the farms are all individual choices that you can decide from. You do not have any farms to start with unless you embarked with one. See the embarkation tutorial for more information on that. So in this biome, Trapper's Camp can pick meat, insects, and eggs. Now remember, we already have the small Trapper's Camp. They can pick the small nodes, the 1-star nodes. And by the way, there's more on resource nodes in another tutorial in this series. The Trapper's Camp can pick meat, insects, and eggs. We happen to have meat and eggs that are findable on the ground in this biome. So the Trapper's Camp upgrade could be a good one, and is honestly one of my favorite early choices. However, another good choice here could possibly be the herb garden. While the roots recipe is only 1 star, which means its yield is lower, the herbs here are very useful for, among other things, pies and biscuits and packs of provisions. So an herb garden is a pretty good farm recipe. The plantation, however, is not as suitable in this biome, in my opinion. That's because we already get plant fiber from the trees, as you can see on this conditions pop-out, and we already get berries from the ground, at least a chance of, in both cases. So the plantation, to me, is the poorest choice here. I would choose either this Trapper's Camp upgrade or the herb garden. I would probably sit here and argue with myself for a moment, deciding which one I want to choose, and I have in my Let's Play series. In this case, I think I will choose the herb garden. Once I choose that, I'm immediately taken to the next blueprint choice of the first 3, and I can choose my next building. Now, as for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm choosing these blueprints right away at the beginning of the game. However, a little bit of advice could be to wait to choose your first blueprint until you know what your first cornerstone is and what your first orders are. More on each of those 2 aspects of the game in dedicated tutorials elsewhere in this series. Usually, another frequent early game choice here is a building that's used to make building materials. There are 3 building materials in the game: planks, fabric, and bricks. This second choice gives us a building, or 3 buildings, that can produce all of those items. You will probably want to look through these to decide which item or which material is most important to you. Oftentimes I will go with planks as my first choice no matter what. However, you may want to consider what I call star economy. You can see here the number of stars on each building. The leather worker has 7 stars, which I believe is, if not unique here in this building, very close to it. The lumber mill has 5 total stars, and the carpenter has 6 total stars. However, there's a couple of things to consider. One of those is what resources are available to me. If we look again at this, the leather worker's strongest recipe, the water skins, we can look into a little bit more, and again, more on this component in the following tutorial on the crafting and recipes. But you may want to pull up this panel by clicking on the magnifying glass, which tells you more details about that particular building. And one of the things we can learn here is that the leather worker can only make water skins if it has access to leather, with another ingredient. But leather is important here because leather is limited in where you can obtain it. And in fact, there's very little ways to obtain leather at all in this particular biome, with the exception of having that ranch building. So to me, the leather worker loses those 3 stars. I'm not going to make water skins in this biome, or if I am, I'm very unlikely to. So this building, the star economy of this building, just went from 7 down to 4, in my opinion. Now, if we consider that against the lumber mill, which makes planks at 3 stars, and then scrolls and packs of trade goods at 1 star each, that's 5 stars. That might be a little bit better. But then we look at the carpenter, and we have 2-star planks, which isn't as good, to be fair, but you could compare the recipe here and say, oh, 3 wood makes 2 planks, or 5 wood makes 2 planks. Is it worth it to me to cost a little bit more wood per plank in order to get a tools recipe and a packs of luxury goods recipe, and also to have a star economy of 6 as opposed to 5? Maybe it is. In my opinion, in my choice, probably in this decision would be the carpenter. Now, one of the pieces of advice here is that the game is a roguelike. That means that some of the choices you're given are random, or at least random from a selection, a pool. And this is a good example of that, because I happen to get a choice here of building materials, or building materials, but sometimes you get no choice of building materials in any of these three roles. So always have 2 or 3 strategies in mind, and use them depending on which options, which choices you get here. Now, I did pull out that encyclopedia screen, and I did use this to take a look at a couple of these recipes. However, here on the encyclopedia screen in the buildings menu, or the buildings tab, is every building you have unlocked in your current save. Now note, there are a ton of locked things down here. Some of these are unlocked at different skill levels. Some of them are unlocked via upgrades, and some of them are unlocked via deeds. There are only a handful of buildings that are actually unlocked via deeds. One of those is the big shelter. More on that when we talk about housing. But also there are decorations that are unlocked via deeds. And more on that when we talk about hubs. As you're evaluating recipes for buildings, you may also need to consider other sources of materials besides this. One source is, well, the materials that I got from other buildings that I've already taken, other blueprints that I've already taken. So, for example, we took the farm, the herb garden. So that means we have available to us roots and herbs. Those don't affect this decision particularly, but they may affect the next decision. And in fact, they kind of do, because things like packs of provisions, incense, can be made from herbs, whereas roots can be used to make flour. So, maybe this is a good choice of recipe. But another source of materials are cornerstones or other effects that are listed down here. For example, and this is a great example in this situation, there is a cornerstone that you can take that will give you 3 barrels for free for every 10 planks you make. It's one of my favorites. I take it all the time. If I had that, then this barrel recipe here becomes nearly worthless for me, because I'm never going to use it. So the star economy of this building, if I had that effect, would drop from 6 to 4, and maybe that's not worth it as much as taking the kiln, where I can convert wood into coal to be used in the hearth. See how that is used in the ancient hearth tutorial, which precedes this one in the list. But also I could get a brick recipe and a jerky recipe here, both at 1 star. Maybe that's more worth it to me then. Or maybe the smokehouse is worth it to me with the really nice jerky recipe, as well as a 1-star pottery and 1-star incense. Now, again, more on recipes in the next tutorial in this series, but incense is used to benefit certain species, certain races, and other of these service materials, service goods, are used for other species. So, depending on your selection of species, also in the game, in this particular settlement, you may also choose to continue with or exclude a recipe and therefore a building. Besides the choices, and we'll just pick the provisioner here, besides the choices of blueprints you get in those first 3, you will also be given 8 more choices throughout the course of the game as you gain reputation. Those are indicated by the diamond icons at each of these reputation points. At each of those points, you will get 1 more roll chance, which will have 3 or 4 later in the game choices for you to pick from. And beyond that, there are additional sources of blueprints. Orders, for one. They're a common source of blueprints, an uncommon source of blueprints, actually. Oftentimes, it's a service building, that is given as that choice, and usually require you to have a building that can make a material that's used in that service building in order to satisfy the order to then get the service building. Traders will also carry with them blueprints on occasion. One of the advantages of taking a blueprint from a trader or even from an order is that it removes it from that random pool. So a blueprint can only be taken once per settlement, which means that if you purchase a blueprint from a trader, or you take an order and complete the order that gives a blueprint, that means it will never show up in the random pool of possible blueprints you are presented with at each of these points, which is very useful if you kind of want to remove a blueprint from appearing there. Sometimes the roguelike nature will get stuck in a rut and you'll be presented with the same blueprint multiple times in multiple rolls. It can become frustrating. If you take that one, then it never appears again, or if you purchase it, or if you take it from an order. The final other source of blueprints is the Smuggler's Visit. The Smuggler's Visit is a special cornerstone that appears fairly rarely, but it gives you the ability to choose one blueprint from all of the blueprints you've unlocked so far in your game, which is very useful also for getting that blueprint that gives you the one thing that you just can't get with random luck, and or to remove a blueprint from the random pool. Buildings are also obtained through other means besides blueprints. Glades out in the world here will sometimes contain ruins. You can choose to rebuild those ruins, which will then give you that building. Note, however, that building is not a blueprint. You will only have that one instance of that building. If that building happens to be a farm or a gathering camp, you will have one instance of that particular farm or gathering camp. Even if that gathering camp is a large version of one of these, you will still only be able to build additional small camps, not the large camp. The only camp that will be large of that type is the one that you restored in the glade. Now, camps and farms are movable, and other buildings are as well, but for many buildings that are unmovable, you will have to make sure that you have storage close enough, the main warehouse being one type of storage. Other storages are the small warehouses available here, in order to make that building efficient enough. Also, you can convert a few glade events into decorations. Altars of Decay, Fishman Lighthouse, Harmony Spirit Altar, Rain Totem, Totem of Denial. These are all convertible into Harmony decorations. Now, more on how these work, or what these mean, in the Hubs tutorial, but suffice it to say that these will help your town if you move them into the Hub range, as we talked about in the in the Hearth range, as we talked about in the Hearth tutorial. Once you have converted those glade events into a decoration, you can then move them on the map freely. Final thing to mention is, once again, in the buildings list here, all of these locked, whether they are locked via level or they are locked via upgrade or deed, all of these buildings will be able to be unlocked throughout the course of your gameplay. You will find that many of those buildings will offer new recipes that you do not have at the very beginning of the game, but you may also find that they offer either different star level versions of recipes you have, or they offer the same recipes that you have in another building with another combination of other recipes. That leads to a whole forked chaos map version of the different possibilities of combinations of buildings. It really gives the game its replayability value. That particular aspect, more than a lot of other things, are what gives the game a lot of replay value. Because all those different combinations means that no two maps are really the same. No two towns are really the same. So that pretty much covers everything about buildings and blueprints in the game. The remaining tutorials in this series will cover the other aspects of the game, as I mentioned at the beginning. I want to thank you all for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comment section below, or join me on Discord, the link is in the description below, and discuss the game with me there. If there are aspects of buildings and blueprints that I didn't cover properly, please let me know that I will add pinned comments to the video with any supplemental content. If you have suggestions for other tutorials, feel free to leave those as well. I will also be starting the game over with a fresh save in a new Let's Play series, so you can see some practical use of buildings or blueprints in that series. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.